My name is Evelyn Farkas. For those who don't know me, I'm the executive director of the McCain Institute. We are bursting with pride today to unveil the McCain Institute Task Force on Russia. We commissioned Dan Twining, the president of IRI, who is also here and will also be leading the panel discussion in a few moments, to lead this task force. It is a truly impressive task force. You can see some of the members here comprising the panel. These are experts on Russia. They're conservative experts. They found a conservative consensus on Russia beyond the war in Ukraine. So while, of course, the war in Ukraine is waging today, we must think about what happens in the future. Whether there's a war in Ukraine or not, Russia will remain our adversary. So we are very proud of this task force and the recommendations that came out of the task force. I want to thank not only Dan Twining, but Alexis Mrachik, who led the effort, along with Corbin Teague, who is our former colleague, who may be in the room as well. But most of all, I want to welcome Senator Mitch McConnell. Sir, we are deeply honored that you are here to help us announce our task force findings. Senator McConnell needs no introduction, but I will give him one. He is really the Senate's conscience right now on foreign policy. He is the leading speaker for a strong, activist foreign and defense policy, not only on Ukraine, but across the globe. The senator understands what it means to stand by our allies, to stand by our convictions, to stand for this world order. He is Kentucky's senior senator. He is the longest serving Senate leader from any party in the history of the United States Senate. Senator, I can go on and speak more about you, but mostly I would like to turn the floor over so that we can hear from you. Thank you so much.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to town. I'm reminded that I have a program at the University of Louisville where I went undergraduate, and we had a particular event, and I was trying to decide who would be the best one to come if I could get him to do it. John McCain. And he came, he spent a good deal of time with the students that I have there, and we had occasional differences, but on the subject that brings us together today, we were totally together. And before I start my prepared remarks, let me just make a couple of observations. The launching of tariff wars is not brand new. That happened in the 30s. The slogan, America First, is not brand new. That happened in the 30s as well. And so the question is, how do you best avoid a war? And you might be interested to know that at the height of World War II, 37% of our GDP was spent on defense. In Korea, 13%, in Vietnam, 9%. The Reagan famous buildup, peace through strength, only 6%. Over the last administration, and this administration is only slightly better, we didn't even keep up with inflation for 4 years. So one of my remaining missions as I head toward the exit is to do everything I can to try to convince this administration that the Reagan approach, the McCain approach, is the best way to avoid a conflict. And so I think there are those, no not only at the Defense Department, but at the White House, who were trying to convince the president we ought to do less, not more. I think just the opposite is the case. And let's hope the president continues to move in the direction he has the last couple of weeks. I thought dropping a bomb on Iran was a great idea, probably long overdue. And I think the president learned a lot about how Vladimir Putin just sort of keeps on keeping on. So I haven't given up hope that this administration will become more like the one that was in power when I came here many years ago. It's hard to think of a more appropriate home for the task force's important work than the McCain Institute, or a more fitting ringleader than a proud McCain alumnus like Dan Twining. When Putin called the fall of the Soviet Union the greatest political catastrophe of the 20th century, John McCain understood that he meant it and urged our colleagues to take Russia's neo-Soviet ambitions seriously. In the not-so-distant past, that sort of clarity, acknowledging that Russia still threatened America's interests, at one point could invite public scorn. In that regard, one thing I really admired about Madeleine Albright, she had said during Mitt Romney's run for the White House, when he said the Russians were our number one adversaries, she laughed at him. She apologized to Romney before she passed away. Romney was right. Like the sort of sanctimonious condemnation a certain former colleague of mine, the one I just described to you, from President Obama as well, during the primetime debate that they had, as if Romney somehow didn't know what was going on. We heard that Putin would moderate, that his ambitions were limited, and that anyone who suggested otherwise was a dusty, Cold War past his prime, out of touch with reality. Well, it's nice to be with people who I suspect, for the most part, feel about this pretty much the way I do. Needless to say, the importance of grappling with Russia's behavior and motivations can't be laughed away any longer. The wake-up call is perhaps the most tired phrase of the past 3 years. And yet that's exactly what Putin's escalation in 2022 was: an urgent, overdue, uncomfortable, and undeniable alarm. I was there 2 months after the invasion. Many of us have gone over the years. These are the same Russians. My dad, who fought in World War II, first ran into in Pilsen in the Czech Republic, which is where the war ended, May the 8th, 1945. I have letters at home that my dad wrote my mother during that period, in which he said, I think the Russians are going to be a big problem. He was just a regular foot soldier. This is not somebody who had any particular insight other than to observe how much the Czechs wanted to end up on the right side of the line. All of this is a reminder that the realities of geopolitics don't care which region we'd rather prioritize or what rather spend our treasury on. The bravery of Ukraine's defenders and the suffering of its civilians press us to remember that our enemies actually get a vote. There are, of course, promising signs that the West has managed to free itself from the delusion that hegemonic aggressors can be appeased. Reports from our European allies rebuilding their military strength are not exaggerated. That's extremely important. Nearly all NATO members today are striving toward the Baltics example of investment and readiness, and those who are not should hear from all the rest of us. In the process, allies are making overdue sacrifices to stamp out dependency on Russian energy. They're placing enormous investments in cutting-edge American-made weapons, and they're proving willing to break domestic political China, even changing a constitution or two to unlock deeper and more sustained commitments to collective defense. Good example of that is Germany. Just totally different now, completely different approach than they've had since World War II. So this transformation is real, it's underway, and it's essential to securing America's interests in the coming decades. What about here at home? As friends of Ukraine, we may be tempted to dwell on the ways we drag behind this process and overlook the ways we underpin it. We might rightly be frustrated by years of murky commitments, slow-walked assistance, fear of escalation, and confusion about who the aggressor might be. I'd suggest that on this, America has much to be proud of. Just consider the cascading benefits of U.S. assistance to Ukraine. A small fraction of our defense budget has helped Ukraine resist and degrade a more powerful military aggressor. After years of talk and little action to address the shortcomings of our own arsenal and our own defense industrial base, we've spurred massive investments in replenishing stocks and producing deterrent capabilities faster. By partnering with the world's most experienced practitioners of drone warfare, we've tapped into a wealth of knowledge about the changing nature of the modern battlefield. Ukraine's expertise is actually teaching America what our forces will need in the future to prevail. And as NATO's biggest spender, America has encouraged much of our allies' transformation. Of course, I don't mean to suggest that we've escaped the gravitational pull of complacency and short-sightedness for good. Our allies' progress is not assured forever. European security and transatlantic security is not some clock to be wound once and then left alone. Perhaps the biggest lesson of 2022, even bigger than the need to invest urgently today, is the importance of long-term commitments and steady annual investments in defense. And on this front, America must continue to lead by our own example. We simply cannot expect allies to reach a sustained 5% if we're only willing to spend 3.5% ourselves. A strategy to lead from behind is no strategy at all. And as the task force makes perfectly clear, this goes beyond spending targets It's about presence as well. Even as our allies and partners build more lethal forces, there's still no more credible deterrent than American commitment. No wonder European allies generously support rotational deployments of U.S. troops and invest in state-of-the-art training ranges for joint exercises. These commitments improve our collective readiness and interoperability, and they're worth sustaining. The task of illustrating the strategic importance of Europe to America's security interests is not ours alone. In fact, for years now, there's been no more effective communicator of what's at stake in Ukraine, strategically and morally, than Putin himself. As he continues to throw a generation into the meat grinder of combat and target Ukrainian mothers and children at will, Putin's sending us a pretty clear message. And in the face of this brutal aggression and public revisionism, overwhelming majorities of Americans recognize Russia, our adversary, and see that the outcome of Putin's war of conquest matters immensely to us. Much to the dismay of restrainers and isolationists who thought they'd get to freelance American foreign policy, the President of the United States increasingly sees Putin's signals for what they are. The President has been right to recognize Putin's play for time. He's been right to entertain proposals for new secondary sanctions. More importantly, he's been right to greenlight further lethal assistance to Ukraine. I've said this before, stopping the killing is a noble goal, but the price of peace actually matters. And there'll be no enduring peace unless Ukraine is equipped to credibly deter further aggression from Russia. The appetite for neo-Soviet imperialism does not end with Ukraine. How do we know? Because Putin's predecessors subjugated far wider swaths of Europe, because he invaded Georgia, and because as we speak, the troops are in Moldova too. Nations that have spent centuries in Russia's shadow do not stumble westward by accident. Finland and Sweden did not join NATO out of symbolic solidarity with Ukraine. They did it because they know that Putin wants more, lots more. So the task force is right to take the long view and grapple seriously with what comes next. What comes next for the transatlantic alliance? What comes next for the increasingly aligned authoritarians working to undermine U.S. interests and influence? What comes next for America and our ability to defend these interests and preserve this influence? As you put it, our deterrence is not divisible. And I would add, this is because our credibility is not divisible. No U.S. ally in the Indo-Pacific has time to waste on the notion that the implications of deterrence in Europe are confined to a separate sphere of influence. No ally in Europe can afford to miss the crystal clear connection between Russian aggression and support from China, North Korea, and Iran. The consequences of American strategic decisions still ripple across oceans and continents with equal speed. And a headline that reads, "Russia wins, America loses," will read as clearly in Beijing, Tehran, Pyongyang, as it does right here in Washington. Avoiding that outcome will take more work from all of us. Thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you, Senator McConnell. We're very grateful for your leadership and the moral clarity and the steeliness of your vision, which so many of us subscribe to. I'm Dan Twining, I'm president of the International Republican Institute. I was the task force coordinator. Looking forward to sharing some of our findings with you, and we're very grateful to the McCain Institute for hosting our group. I'll introduce the panelists when we sit down and have our conversation, which we're just about to do here. We're also very proud to have other task force members in the audience, Cliff May from FDD, Ian Brzezinski from the Atlantic Council, other friends who've contributed very importantly to this project over a period of months. And this project initiated when, frankly, we were a little worried about a bad peace deal in Ukraine, maybe one that made Russia great again at American expense. We're in a very different place now. Vladimir Putin has miscalculated. NATO has really gotten itself together, and the President of the United States has grown increasingly frustrated, as have members of Congress, as attested by the fact that you've now got 85 Senate sponsors of a bill to impose existential sanctions of 500% on countries supporting Russia's war effort. Our bottom line, as you'll hear from our conversation here over the next half hour or so, is that Russia, under Vladimir Putin, is a great power adversary of the United States. It has colluded with America's enemies in China, Iran, and North Korea to form an axis of aggressors. There is a mutual support network, as Senator McConnell mentioned, for Russia's criminal war effort. Russia would not have been able to sustain the war without the support of this axis of aggressors. These countries, led by China and Russia, want to overthrow the American-led free world order and build a spheres of influence world that is safe for their authoritarian values and that is just highly detrimental not only to American national security but to the freedoms that Americans enjoy. The United States and our way of life would not be safe in a world in which authoritarian aggressors are on the march. And as Senator McConnell said, our failure to deter Russia's assault in Europe, producing the biggest war since World War II, if not rectified, could produce an even greater failure of deterrence in the Indo-Pacific. If it emboldens the Chinese Communist Party to think they can seize Taiwan by military force. So our bottom line is that only a US policy that confronts Putin from a position of strength, recognizes the predatory and imperial nature of his ambitions, stops him in Ukraine, prevents the war from spreading further west in ways that would even more directly implicate American lives and treasure. That is the policy that we need to be pursuing to secure a sustainable peace in Europe. We'll talk through a little more of our recommendations with my colleagues here. Let me just introduce them, and then I will sit down and have our conversation. Rebeccah Heinrichs, you run the Keystone Defense Initiative at the Hudson Institute. You have been an advisor to DOD and the US Armed Forces on various advisory bodies. You've also been really terrific on social media and standing up to a lot of nonsense and kind of fake news about who the good guys are in Ukraine and what America needs to do to secure peace in the West, so thank you. Brad Bowman, you were an Army officer for many years as well as a professor. You were a national security advisor in the Senate for Senators Young and Ayotte. It's really terrific. You're now at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, leading their Center on Political and Military Power. I really appreciate that fusion because, of course, we know that our adversaries are using political instruments, not simply military ones, to attack the West and the free world. So thank you. Antonia Ferrier, this is a bit of an inside job because you were the spokeswoman for the Senate Republican leadership when a certain Mitch McConnell was the Senate Republican leader, but you're here on your own merits because you've been a great principled advocate for Ukraine and for kind of a Reaganite policy of peace through strength in Europe, working very closely with our allies. You're also an IRI alum. We're very happy to have you here. Kurt Volker, Ambassador Volker and I worked together in John McCain's office, if you can believe it. Kurt, I have a bad idea. It was at least 25 years ago and possibly a little longer. So luckily, Kurt hasn't aged at all. You were ambassador to NATO, you were special rep for Ukraine negotiations in the first Trump administration, and you're just a powerful voice in picking apart Vladimir Putin's motivations and what America needs to do. Okay, I'm gonna ask the first question and then sit down. Rebeccah, give us your sense. You're an expert in deterrence. How can we restore deterrence and peace in Europe? What does the United States need to do?
Well, it's a privilege to be here with you all, and it was an honor to participate in this particular task force. I'm just going to spend just a little bit of time so I can turn it over to my colleagues here to make their remarks. But one of the great things about this report is we really did try to make it useful. So we start off by sort of identifying the problem. Fundamental to a good foreign policy is properly identifying friends and enemies. And so we're very clear that although diplomacy is always our goal, we're working towards diplomacy, but there's a certain way that we have to do it in order to make sure that we're not unintentionally creating more conflict and worse and larger war. And so obviously our goal is to compel Russia to stop and to strengthen deterrence so that Russia doesn't escalate either vertically, that is crossing the nuclear threshold, or horizontally, which is attacking directly one of our NATO allies and drawing the United States into a larger conflict. I think that those are goals that the president also shares, but it's not enough to sort of have those goals. You have to have ones that work. And so we outline what we think is best to do that. So we zoom out then and say, yes, the war in Ukraine has been the focus in Congress and with the country, but if you zoom out, you can see Russia's larger goals in the larger geopolitical context. And it's important for Americans to understand that even after Ukraine, when we help Ukraine get to the end of this war, make sure that it's secure, free, and sovereign, stop further Russian aggression, that Russia is going to remain an acute and ongoing threat to the United States and our interests. And yes, Russia is part of a growing and increasingly powerful axis led by China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And we have to have clear eyes about that, even as we approach strategies to try to degrade one of the members of the alliance. I think President Trump's decision in Operation Midnight Hammer was incredibly useful in, one, demonstrating political resolve for the other members of the Axis, demonstrating military competency, and then also very practically speaking, really harming Russia's objectives in the Middle East and also China's objectives in the Middle East. And so I think we are really on much sounder footing than we were before that operation. And so the last couple of things I'll just say about this report is that we agree that China poses a serious threat to the United States. And I would say, I'm not speaking for myself, the greatest capacity to do the greatest harm. But that doesn't mean that we can ignore an acute and peer adversary, which is Russia, that still has significant military power that it hasn't brought to bear in this war. It's reconstituting its forces at an alarming rate. And so even as Ukraine really demonstrates incredible adaptive ability, military prowess on the battlefield, all kinds of things that the United States and our Western allies are learning about how to combat a peer adversary, that it's still going to continue to need American and NATO support to do that. And then I agree with Senator McConnell that we're in an era, because we do have this axis, that the United States is the coalescing force with NATO. We are the leading power of NATO, and even as we ask our allies to do more, that's going to be more successful in actually having them do more when the United States still has skin in the game and is the coalescing force in the alliance. And as we require our NATO allies to spend 5% of GDP, so should we as the leader and the coalescing force of that alliance. I believe it's just necessary given the threat context. And so we argue that if you don't want to see this war escalate further, that the best thing you can do is to further arm Ukraine, and then also ensure that the front line of the NATO alliance is secure and strong. That means the Baltic nations, Poland as well, and then the new members of the alliance, obviously Finland and Sweden. And so then we make recommendations about how best to do that. I guess I'm going to leave that there so I can turn it over to my colleagues to make their points, then we can get into some more specifics.
Thanks. We'll come back to you and unpack some of it. Thank you. Brad, you've really been so clear-eyed in your advocacy around what the United States needs to do to make sure that our enemies do not put us in an even greater position of peril. You've also just done foundational work on the collaboration between Russia and these other authoritarian adversaries of the United States. FDD has been really just a great thought leader led by you, so please give us your take.
Well, thank you, Dan. Let me start by saying it's led by Cliff May, our founder and president, who also leads our Russia program, and Cliff and I together, we're real honored to be part of this task force. And Dan, I just want to say I really respect the role you played here, the foresight about the need to do this. Your long-time role at IRI, my former boss, Senator Kelly Ott, was an IRI board member. I'm a big fan of IRI, and one of the great privileges of my life serving as our national security advisor was to be able to interact a little bit with Senator John McCain, a hero, a man of character, a man I'm missing a lot these days. So it's just so great to be here and with all my distinguished friends and colleagues. Yeah, the bipartisan and congressionally mandated National Defense Strategy Commission issued a report last summer that if you haven't read it, I'd really recommend you put it on your weekend reading table. And you'll notice that the first paragraph that they start with, and these aren't partisan hacks, these are centrist, serious national security people. They say essentially in the beginning that we're confronting the most dangerous geostrategic environment we've seen as a country since 1945. And that there's a possibility for near-term major war for which we are unprepared. That's my paraphrase of their introductory sentence. How's that for a lapel grabber? So if you buy that, which I do, I think the People's Republic of China alone is arguably more threatening than anything we saw from the Soviet Union. If you buy that, and then you consider this cooperation that we're seeing between China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. I'm leading a year-long effort at FDD where we're looking at cooperation among China, Russia, Iran, North Korea across multiple domains, not just military and political, economic and financial, cyber and technology. Just in the military domain across 5 categories: weapons development, weapons proliferation, intel sharing, mill-to-mill diplomacy, and military exercises, we've documented more than 490 instances of cooperation between China, Russia, Iran, North Korea that's making each of them in their respective spheres of aggression or prospective aggression more capable, more capacity, more resilience, and more readiness. So each of them are more formidable on their own, and together they present real dilemmas that I think call into question longstanding assumptions here on Capitol Hill and here in the Pentagon about, hey, our adversaries are going to be nice enough to present us with one major war at a time, and we may not confront real war in the Baltics and the Taiwan Strait at the same time. You don't have to be Nostradamus to figure out if Putin tries something in 3 to 4 years in the Baltics, what Xi might want to do in the Taiwan Strait. And newsflash, we're not ready. Why are we not ready? We're not ready because if you look at defense spending, don't worry, I won't give you too many numbers, over the last few years, other than 3 years just before 9/11, we have not spent this little on defense as a percentage of GDP since 1940. 1940, the year before Pearl Harbor. Let me give you another little 1940 nugget. General Marshall, Army Chief of Staff, has a quote that I overuse. I'm sorry, it's just too good. I'm paraphrasing. He says, for 20 years, I had the time and I didn't have the money. This is him speaking in 1940. We know what happened in 1941. And then I had the money and I didn't have the time, right? So that's why dorks like me keep saying over and over again, we gotta keep spending now because it's gonna take time to get those field of combat capabilities. And that's why we have a window of vulnerability in Europe, where I'm as frustrated as many of you are with European defense spending, right? But there's a right way and a wrong way to work with allies and friends to encourage them to spend more. You don't threaten to not honor Article 5, foolish, not smart, and invites the thing that alliance is designed to intend, and they need time to actually put their money where their mouth is, to build their industrial capacity, build their arsenals, and increasingly step up to the plate on the Ukraine. But newsflash, they're already stepping up to the plate on Ukraine because if you look at the Kill Institute report, they've spent more as an aggregate overall in helping Ukraine than we have, and they're now exceeding us, I believe, just by a little bit on security assistance. So what you heard in certain cable news channels is just not correct. It's just not correct. And by the way, if you look at the $66 billion that we've spent on security assistance, we did some math last year. This is as of September. The number's gotten even lower. You say, $66 billion, that's a lot of money. Okay, compared to Pentagon spending over the same time period, that's equivalent to less than 2.8% of what we spent on the Pentagon. So here's the question for the folks outside the Beltway maybe tuning in. Do you think it's worth the equivalent of 2.8% of what we spent on the Pentagon to have other people degrading the second leading military conventional threat we confront, help Ukraine continue to exist, decrease the likelihood of a war between the United States and Russia where we would be having American service members fighting and dying, and sending a very clear message to Beijing that we're not neutral when it comes to naked, unprovoked aggression, thereby decreasing the chances of the worst war of the 21st century on or about 2028 in the Taiwan Strait. Where I come from, that's called a wise investment and not charity, and it's a no-brainer. Okay? So European buying American weapons, great. Chairman Wicker and Chairman Risch's legislation that I believe they're introducing today, a brilliant idea. What's the idea there? Have a fund at the Treasury, as I understand it, where Europeans can contribute to replace American weapons sent via Presidential Drawdown Authority. What's the advantage? You get weapons there in 3 to 4 days, not 3 to 4 months, and the Europeans are paid for it, thereby doing a backdoor modernization of the arsenal that we're going to use, God forbid, if deterrence fails in Taiwan Strait in 2028. I go on forever. I'll end with this, as you can tell. The transatlantic community is experiencing a home invasion, right? This is a home invasion. Vladimir Putin is a home invader. He started this war. It's unprovoked. It's naked aggression. It's a reminder that unprovoked naked aggression is not a relic of the black and white newsreels of the first half of the 20th century. Last time I checked, human nature hasn't changed. It still happens. So what do you do with that? You say, I'm sorry, you're hitting something hard, and that something hard is American political will and combat power provided to someone else who's wielding that bat. So when your neighbor is invaded, what do? You sit there and say, oh, that sucks for them. Right now, if you can, you pass the Louisville Slugger over the back fence so your neighbor can brutalize the home invader. So for what goal? Because we just want to brutalize someone? No. We want the home invader to reconsider his line of work so he doesn't invade your home next. Can we afford the Louisville Slugger? We cannot afford to not buy that Louisville Slugger and pass it over the back fence because it's not charity, it's a wise investment. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Well put. Antonia, I counted, you've worked for 6 senators and congressmen, and you're still only in your 20s.
Thank you, Dan.
You've also been highly engaged with our European allies. They are stepping up. It's slow, but it's happening. Give us your sense on where things stand as we look ahead on Russia.
You know, I think many people in this room have talked to a lot of Europeans. I mean, it's taken them a while. I think everyone has been frustrated in the past with where they've been, but I'd like to just focus a little bit on Germany. Yes, we have a relatively new government with Friedrich Merz as the chancellor. Don't count them out. They have done almost the unthinkable, which Senator McConnell mentioned. They got rid of their debt brake for really incredible debt. It's going to be debt-financed spending with the vast majority going to defense. They have a lot of things they have to work through, and I'm sure some of our military analysts here and friends could get more into that. They don't have a lot of muscle memory in terms of like procurement. They have just some really fundamental things that they have to work through. But this past week, the Bundestag passed the longest named law ever, and I can't even say it, but Pistorius, who's their defense minister, basically said we gotta streamline procurement. This is just too difficult. My point with the Germans is it took them a while. This Zeitenwende took too many years, but they're there. They're going to spend. They have a lot that they've got to do. To the point that Senator McConnell made, we need to give them a little bit of time so they can build up. They need, in a lot of ways, I think there needs to be more collaboration and discussion to help them work through some of the fundamental issues. But they're there. The money's there. And I think that is something Corey Shackey over at AEI said many years ago to me. She said, money does matter. And so the commitment on the money is there. The thing I think that we have to remember is, and the Europeans need to tell their own populace, is that the Russians are already at war with Europe. I mean, no, they don't have tanks on the streets of Berlin, but they actually put a hit out on the CEO of Rheinmetall, one of the largest defense manufacturers in the world. Why would they do that? I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? They're linked to anti-Semitic graffiti around Paris. Gee, why would they do that? They are trying to destabilize within these societies. So I think for the Europeans, they need to understand that this threat is, yes, it's military, and yes, it's conventional, but it is asymmetric as well, and the war is already there. There is one political party in Germany, for example, that has been linked to Russian money. I will not name it, but I think we all know which one it is. The Russians are using every tool they can to destabilize from within. The war is already happening. So there is also why there's political leadership there, in particular in Germany, and it's easier as you go east because the threat is more there. There really needs to be a real push within their countries to really educate their people about the threat, that they can't just go back to their long summer vacations and working 38 hours a week. They have an aggressive program that they need to do to tell and inform their own people. They also, and this is an economic question, the Europeans, they can spend a lot of money. They've got to really do some economic reforms to help boost where they are. Helsing is one of Germany's success stories. Just as a side fact, I think is very interesting. 70% of the private money that has gone into Helsing is American. They have to start in really moving forward on economic reform, because if they are not really producing on the economic front for their people, they're going to really struggle, I think, to keep the war fight going, because for most populations, especially in Europe, and they're used to their lovely lives, you can easily see how they will fall back to a butter over guns situation. So I'm confident, and I also will say, back to some of the other comments here, I mean, would I rather be where we are than where the Russians are? Yes, and I think we can't discount that. There was some Russian propaganda that was put out on social media where they were looking at one of their factories that's building drones, and they were like, look they're working 24/7. Well, it was all being made by human beings. We are actually automized. We use machinery. We use advanced robotics to build our military and our defense systems. They're still using people. That is not a very sophisticated way of building weapon systems. Rebeccah, you would know better than me. But we have a lot of advantages. We may be loud, and the Russians like to take advantage of our own internal discord. But the fact is, we've got a lot of things that I would count on us beating them any day of the week. So I think the resolve is there, the money is there. We've got to keep convincing the people, and I think the Europeans will get there.
Thank you, Antonia. Kurt, thank you for your patience. You're going to get 2 questions, and then we'll work our way back, okay? So thank you for staying with us. You did really important work on NATO enlargement in the Senate and then at the NSC. You have always been just very clear-eyed on our interest in a Europe free, whole, and at peace. Even in the days when people, including sometimes the President of the United States, thought Vladimir Putin was our friend, you were very clear. You've worked at NATO. You've seen this from every angle. Please share a few reflections.
Okay, thank you very much, Dan. And it reminds me a little bit of being at NATO, because for the most part, everything has been said, but not everyone has said it. So what I thought I would do is just make a few 5 clear points. Number 1, the continent of Europe is of vital strategic importance to the United States. Nobody should get confused about this. There's no looking the other way. It is as President Trump found last week in Turnberry, he got a $750 billion commitment to buy American energy and a $600 billion commitment to invest in the United States. Nobody else can do that. Only Europe and the United States together form the largest economic relationship in the world, and it is hugely beneficial to both of us. So this is a vital strategic interest. Number 2, Russia, not China, not Iran, not North Korea, Russia is the most important immediate strategic threat to Europe, and therefore is a vital concern to the United States. Putin has the means, the will, and the declared intent to take other countries and rebuild the Russian Empire. This is a major threat, and it is one that would involve the United States. Number 3, NATO is our best way of dealing with that threat. As President Trump said when he was in the Netherlands in June, NATO is not a ripoff. It is not. It is our allies putting money into defense, partnering with the United States, sharing values, interests, and action in order to contain the threat in Europe, and join us when we try to deal with other crises around the world, as they have done in Bosnia and Kosovo and Afghanistan and Iraq and Libya and Israel and sub-Saharan Africa and so on. So NATO is not a ripoff. It is our best tool for dealing with security in Europe. Number 4, as he wishes, as Senator McConnell said just now, the world is all connected. You can't have the luxury of saying, oh, we're going to deal with China and forget Europe. It's all connected. And this idea of a reverse Kissinger is just fool's play. It's foolhardy. You can't work with Russia and isolate China because Putin won't work with you. And China doesn't care if Russia's working with China or not. China's doing its own thing. So we have to deal with the world the way it is. And it's all connected, as was pointed out by Senator McConnell and others. And then 5, what this report does is it lays out a strategy for dealing with Russia. And I'd recommend just going through. It's short, it's well organized, it's got brief points, it's worth taking a look at. I'm just going to highlight now a few of the things in the report that I think are important. I didn't count these. Number 1, though, is you have to contain Russia. Russia has to live within its own borders, just like everybody else. There's no special exception for saying, oh, well, Russia can have this piece of territory or that piece of territory. Or we have to have, Russia has to live within its borders. Now, why is that important? It's because our strategy for dealing with Russia has to be based on the understanding that Russia is the only empire left standing. French Empire's gone, British Empire's gone, American Empire kind of fizzled. But the Russian Empire is still an empire, and Putin wants to build it back to all its glory. So we have to stop that. We have to contain it. Second, and where I think President Trump is right, and we have not done a good job at this, we have to weaken Russia's state finances. We cannot allow money to flow into Russia for them to pay for this war. Third, we need a positive strategy for dealing with the countries near Russia. And you talked about NATO enlargement, that's part of it. It is economic engagement, it is American presence, it is security, it is integration, it is infrastructure. We have to be proactive in working with the countries in Russia's neighborhood, or otherwise they are more vulnerable to Russia going after them. Another one where President Trump has got it right is building and leveraging America's energy dominance. Russia leveraged its energy dominance in Europe to our detriment for many years. He is right that we need to replace that. And the EU has said they're going to stop buying Russian gas by the end of 27. They said they're going to buy a lot of American gas, but we should be deadly focused on building that energy dominance. It will open a lot of doors. It'll leverage a lot of policy in the world. And then finally, we must not cede the information space to authoritarian adversaries. This, unfortunately, is one where I believe President Trump hasn't got it right. We need to be doing a better job of telling America's story, getting information that reflects our interests and our values out in the world, and do that better than RT and Sputnik and CCTV and Al Jazeera and all the others. We need to make that a priority. We can't cede the information space to them.
Very well said. Rebeccah wants to come in. Rebeccah.
Yeah, I do. No, I wanted to back up with a little more details on the first point you made, Kurt, about our interests. So one of the things that's interesting about this group is we're conservatives. So it's nonpartisan, but we're a series of, we're conservatives. And so we come at this problem as conservatives. I'm just going to say what I think that means, just to differentiate, because I think there's been some confusion on this space. I believe that the purpose of American power is to increase the security, the freedom, and the prosperity of the American people. Okay, That is what I believe is the critical, that is what American power is for. That's our military, it's our economic power. Because of that, I believe that American economic and military power should be to bolster key American interests that benefit the American people. So back to the point that Kurt made about Europe, I just wanted just a couple of things. This is from a great piece by Wes Mitchell and Jakob Griegel, wrote in Foreign Policy. He says, the United States invests 4 times more in Europe than it does in Asia. Europeans invest 10 times more in the United States than in China and India combined. The United States has 30 allies in Europe compared to 6 in the Indo-Pacific. The collective GDP of European NATO allies is 20 trillion. That of allied Asia is 9 trillion. So I can go on. And those numbers are even better now after the president's trade deals that he just made with the European Union. That is not to diminish the importance of Asia, critically important. But if the United States stands a chance at winning this Cold War with this axis, it must have a strong and secure Europe. If we want to take on China successfully, we must be good allies to these allies that make up the basis of American security and prosperity. And so that, I think, is a really critical point that maybe has been missed in sort of the information warfare space over the last several years. But I think that's really, really important. The last point, I did also wanted to add to the making NATO stronger point as well. I mean, President Trump came out of this NATO summit saying amazing things about NATO, not just, of course, hugging Article 5, but also saying that he understands that NATO is not a ripoff, that it helps the United States, because the extent that NATO is strong, that gives the United States the ability to take on other regions of the world. And so you do see an increased commitment from the part of our allies. The other thing I would say, though, it's not just going to be about defense spending. Where that money goes and what it is invested in matters. It's everything. It's the whole ball game. So we need these permanent brigades that these wealthier members of the alliance have committed to the Baltic states. We do need to see Germany having that permanent brigade in, I believe it's Estonia as its partner country, or it could be Lithuania, somebody knows. Lithuania, and then you have the Canadians in the other, Estonia, I think, and then you have the Brits in Estonia, Canada and Latvia, and Germany, I think, in Lithuania. That is critically important. I remind people that current Russian-occupied territory in Ukraine is more than 2 geographic spaces of Estonia. Estonia will not survive. I hear people say, well, look, Rebeccah, Russia can't even take Ukraine. Why are we worried about Russia, taking on a NATO country? And I say, well, first of all, your argument is circular, because the only reason Russia can't take on Ukraine is, yes, it's the courage and the competency of the Ukrainians, but they're being fed weapons from our NATO allies. But they also have geographic depth that our Baltic allies simply do not have. And so they simply would not survive what the Ukrainians have been able to do because of the size of their countries. And so that's why I remind people that the security of NATO relies on the strength of the Baltic countries. And so I'm encouraged to see changes in the German government. I've spent time in Helsinki and in Warsaw, and going to other NATO countries in the fall, and just hearing, and I've not heard any, it's a completely different alliance than the one that I was working with even 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. The last point I wanted to make, I also wanted to commend, sorry for your beach reads, if you're not all done going to the beach at this point, and you're just here in this warm, swampy weather, is the Strategic Posture Commission, on which I served as one of the Republicans on the Strategic Posture Commission. One of the things that we observed is this is the first time in American history, again, we have 2 nuclear peer powers. In the Cold War, we had 1. And that means we do have to adapt our nuclear deterrent as well. So yes, we need to invest in defense, get our defense industrial base in the right place. And we can do it when we collaborate with our allies. We can get the DIB in the right place and utilize theirs as well in order to create the ability to produce weapons at the scale and the speed that we need, but also understanding that a cornerstone of the post-World War II order, in which the American people benefit more than anybody, is that the United States provides extended deterrence to our allies. That means nuclear extended deterrence. And the place in which I do believe is the most likely scenario in which nuclear deterrence will fail is a Russian use of a nuclear weapon in Europe. And I don't think that we should just sort of write off Russia's threats as sort of just bluffs. I think that we should take them seriously without being cowed by them. I think that the United States with NATO should prudently and carefully but wisely present a counter-deterrent to the Russians, and that means adapting our nuclear options in the European theater as well.
Thank you. Terrific. All right, we got to keep it tight because we're running out of time and you're on TV. Kurt, can I just come back to you? I just need like a 1-minute answer from each of you, so I'll give you something quick. You've been very eloquent in helping people understand that Putin's aggression abroad is a function, an outgrowth of his repression at home. Could you speak a little bit to that point? Again, just quite briefly.
Sure. And I hate to go totally philosophical here, but the great struggle of humanity has been between people being citizens or people being subjects. That people either get to choose and change their governments and act as citizens, or small groups of people amass power and rule over everybody else. Our fight as a country is about that. Our fight as humanity is about that. Putin is on the other side of that. Putin has a small group of people that control a vast country and use that for their personal power and wealth and aggression. And so he has a need to rule over his country. And part of the way he rules his country is by aggression abroad and convincing them that he is fighting for some larger cause of Slavic destiny, whatever you call it. And they're connected. But it's also the nature of authoritarians that they don't respect their own people, they don't respect other people either. So everything is fair game. And for those of us on the side of citizens, that's why we have to be vigilant.
Well put. Antonia, I just want to telegraphically read a couple poll findings which are included in our report to you and ask for your reaction. 80% of Americans perceive Russia as an adversary. 85% view Russia unfairly. 86% are concerned about its cooperation with China, Iran, North Korea. By a 2-to-1 margin, Americans would support deploying additional American military power in Europe, in Eastern Europe, to shore up NATO. And 3 in 4 Americans want to see more international leadership from the United States, not less. Do you think members of Congress and our friends in the Trump administration understand that American public opinion actually arguably is quite aligned with where this group is on this topic?
It's a good question. I don't know if I can speak for the folks within the Trump administration, but it actually seems very obvious, right? We are a country that is proud of what we've done in securing peace and freedom for the world. I have a very good friend who came with me on an IRAD trip, and he, in Hungary, said to a group of people, he's a political guy. He ran political campaigns, and he said, I have an 8-year-old daughter who was asking him questions after Russia invaded Ukraine and said, we can't let this stand. We don't let this happen. We're the United States of America. And I think we need to remember that. And Rebeccah said, we were talking earlier, that when she goes out around the country and talks to people, this is quite obvious. And you know, back in the 80s, I was thinking about this terrible movie, Red Dawn. I don't know if you all remember it. A terrible movie, yes. But my point is, we understand our movies are about right and wrong. We believe in what is right and wrong. That is who we are as a country. Sometimes we exacerbate other parts of the world, Europeans, and how we believe in right and wrong. I hope that people in the administration understand that we're not going to sit by and allow, say, another Pearl Harbor to happen. That's not who we are as a country. Now, that does not mean that we should be for forever wars. Of course not. We need to be smart in how we do things. But I think we are a profoundly good people. And I think if you go around the country and you talk to people, on the right in particular, people who, their brothers, their fathers, their sisters, I'm looking at Meaghan, she served herself. They've served in our country. We have signs in our airports that say, thank you for our troops who have served. That's who we are. And that's not going to change. Just because there might be a certain part of a political class that has convinced itself otherwise, we understand that we are a unique, shining city on the hill, and we will continue to be that. We have these moments where there's introspection about what that might mean, but no, we are for being that shining example. And I would say to anyone who doubts that, go talk to people around the country.
Well said. Okay, Brad, 1 minute, and then we just have a closing set of remarks from a colleague. Brad, our recommendations include Congress really stepping up. We've seen Congress step up on the sanctions conversation. but we do recommend a select committee on Russia to mirror the select committee on China and the Chinese Communist Party. Congress used to mandate in law a Soviet military power report every year, which is quite useful to members of Congress working in national security and understanding the dimensions. We propose bringing that back, a Russian military power report. We propose the United States funding the president's excellent idea of the Golden Dome, because Putin has made very explicit threats of nuclear blackmail against the United States. And we would like to diminish his ability to do that. We also talk about Congress taking the lead in investing in some of these other instruments, digital tools to spotlight the corruption in Russia, to magnify Putin's fear of his own people, forms of foreign assistance to counter Russian information warfare against us, and to support democratic forces, including in Western Hemisphere, where the Russians are very active in trying to subvert American interests. Brad, do you just want to say something about the role of Congress here?
Sure. No, in 60 seconds or less, I think that we should take this deal that President Trump obtained from Europeans, where you have European money, American weapons going to Ukraine, and make sure that's not just for air defense. It should be for all the weapons, both offensive and defensive, that Ukraine needs to defeat this home invader. Number one. Number two, I think Congress should authorize and appropriate additional funding for Ukraine's Security Assistance Initiative. We should have weapons transferred as a presidential drawdown authority that are replenished. Otherwise, you degrade American military readiness in large part, as much as possible, with European funding, and we need secondary sanctions. I do not think we're going to sufficiently change Putin's calculus without the imposition of strong, robust, comprehensive secondary sanctions. That's my prediction. And America can support Taiwan, Ukraine, and Israel at the same time. If you don't believe me, read our Arsenal Democracy monograph. 18 recommendations there to how to increase our defense industrial base and security assistance and information warfare. We are under attack right now in the information domain. We are at war with Russia right now in the information domain, and yet too many of us don't realize it. We're acting like it's 1991 and it's 2025. We need to go on the offensive in the information domain. We need to take the fight to Vladimir Putin himself by educating the Russian people and the Chinese people that their rulers' only interest is retaining their selfish grip on power. They're doing things contrary to their interests and exposing their corruption. And until we impose the secondary sanctions and take those steps and go on the offensive and the cognitive combat, I fear we're not going to shift the cost-benefit analysis of these aggressors who keep starting these wars.
Well said. Wow. It's like I asked AI and I got a perfect answer in like paragraph English. Thank you, Brad. We didn't even set that up. Okay, we're all going to stay seated. I'm going to invite Meaghan Mobbs to come up to the podium. Let me introduce her. She's president of the Weatherman Foundation, which supported this project. Thank you, Meaghan. She is a former U.S. Army officer, a combat veteran. She has done wonderful work with the Weatherman Foundation to provide humanitarian assistance on the ground in Ukraine. Meaghan, you're going to reflect and close us out.
I am. Is that on? Yes, okay. And the worst place to be is between people and plans, so I am going to be very quick, I hope. But first and foremost, I want to thank Senator McConnell for his presence and his remarks today. I pray he is the first of many to lend his time and attention to this matter. Peace through strength must be more than a slogan and a catchphrase. Dan, thank you for your leadership and your ability to convene such a remarkable group of people, of intellectuals, of experts, of patriots. It's a great honor to be counted amongst all of you. And thank you all for joining today and being here and being willing to read this report and understand its recommendations. As president of the R.T. Weatherman Foundation, you may wonder why a humanitarian aid organization would sponsor something like this, why we might concern ourselves with the hard edge of geopolitics, with questions of deterrence, posture, and power. And the answer is quite simple, because we operate in the aftermath of policy. We stand in the ruins left by indecision, in the silence that follows the failure to deter. We have provided aid to patients who have survived their hospitals being destroyed by bombs. We have searched morgues for loved ones and stood in villages so close to the front you can feel the concussion of Russian artillery. In these places, weakness is not an abstraction. It's a wound, it's a grave, it's a woman who has been raped or a child who has been stolen to Russia. That is why we are here. That is why we chose to sponsor this effort. We believe that humanitarian aid divorced from strategic clarity is not compassion, it's capitulation. And we believe that peace cannot be synonymous with surrender. You cannot claim to care about human life while refusing to confront the forces that destroy it. And you cannot claim to stop, or cannot stop the suffering without stopping the cause. We do not consider ourselves a neutral aid organization. We are Americans, and therefore we follow American interests. And American interests lie in opposition to Russians. The policy principles laid out by this task force present a vision of strength and insist that peace must be just, not just expedient. That deterrence is not a provocation, but a moral obligation. And that the price of freedom must be shared by soldiers and civilians, policymakers, and practitioners alike. We are sponsors and champions of this report because we see the cost of forgetting this responsibility. Russia's war in Ukraine is not a regional issue. It is not a conflict over there. It is a global test of resolve of the US and the larger West. And whether we pass that test depends on whether we are willing to treat this moment with the seriousness it deserves. Because if we get this wrong, if we reward aggression, appease the access of authoritarians, or allow peace to be defined by Putin, we will see this war again, in different places, under different flags, and once again, it will be people, not policymakers, who pay the price. We do not view today's convening as tangential to our mission. It is at the heart of it. For us, confronting Russian aggression is not simply a matter of statecraft. It is defense of human dignity, of moral clarity, and of the principle that the lives of the vulnerable are worth protecting. So thank you for being here today and lending your voice, your expertise, and your credibility to this mission. As Senator McConnell said, this task force takes the long view, and so do we at the foundation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meaghan. Thank you for those really eloquent words. Thank you to the Weatherman Foundation for helping make this possible. I really want to thank, again, our panelists. You guys were fantastic. I have all these, visions now of NATO's not a ripoff, and we need a bigger defense budget, and TV, and Marshall, of course. So thank you, Dan, for leading the panel. Thank you, all of you, for your time. It wasn't just the time you put in to show up today, and for that we are grateful, definitely. We are grateful for the big guns from FDD, for our board member, Jean Bader-Schneider, who came to support this, for all of you for coming here. And please, I hope you go to McCaininstitute.org. You can find the task force report. This is not going to become a document that sits on a shelf. You heard these guys talk about the recommendations that they made. These are serious recommendations. Meaghan also mentioned many of the things that need to happen in order to make sure that we stand strong, that we prevent not only Russia from its neo-imperial objectives, but of course China and other adversaries. So I really want to say thank you. I hope you all stay in touch. Thank you to the McCain Institute team, and good luck braving the weather outside.